My name is Don Holohan. I'm an assistant professor at the University of Hong Kong, and I run a small research practice with my partner Elspeth Lee called Superposition. And this project I'm going to show you to you today, Backpack Housing, is a collaboration between ourselves and a research lab at the university called the Urban Ecologies Design Lab. It's in partnership with Habitat Humanity for Humanity, and it's funded through a Bank of China Hong Kong grant. So Hong Kong is one of the densest urban areas on Earth. The competition for space is intense and acute, and it manifests in a perennial housing crisis. The average waiting time for social housing spaces is now 6 years. And the demand for affordable housing has led to the creation of some extreme typologies of space: nano flats, cage homes, coffin beds, subdivided apartments, and others. These spaces offer shelter, but very little else, and in the worst instances are unsafe and inhumane. However, even these spaces are often out of reach for some of Hong Kong's most vulnerable residents, even though some of them have full-time employment or they're working homeless, which is really the focus of this study. In contrast, and because of the incentives offered by the lack of development land, key urban sites are under continual and fast-paced development and redevelopment as legislators allow for ever taller spaces and society expects ever smaller living spaces. And I think this is clearly articulated in the story of the HSBC building. It's not a housing block, but it's a commercial unit. But in the course of about 120 years, there's been 4 HSBC buildings. The most recent being the Norman Fosters in the 1980s. But each of these buildings are fit for purpose, architecturally significant, and made of quality materials, and could have easily lasted the 120 years on the site. But because of the need for increase in density and the capital to support that, those buildings have been continually redeveloped. This remaking of the city creates some unforeseen redundancies, counterintuitively actually. So as the apartment blocks are demolished and they are rebuilt, they also lay vacant, while ownership disputes are settled and building permits are obtained. These spaces, these temporal spaces, are the notional site for backpack housing. I'm not sure if this is going to play. It is. Which interestingly are also in the most sought after spaces. These spaces are under development, vacant, they're high quality buildings and structures, often not at the end of their design life, but are being redeveloped solely on the need for increased density. So 20-story blocks are being demolished in favor of 40-story blocks with maybe 120% occupancy. So the key to activating these sites was a technological one, and that's digital scanning, in particular LiDAR scanning. This enabled us to map the peculiarities and idiosyncrasies of each site. And over a period of time, we mapped a number of buildings in this condition throughout the city. And we began conversations with the developers who owned these buildings and were in the process of remaking them. This also became our site, these buildings, and allowed us to create limits around architectural responses to this temporal opportunity. Through this sort of study, we had the good fortune to meet one particular forward-thinking developer, which was Sinochem based in Hong Kong, who was in the process of redeveloping a 20-story tower in Jordan. And Jordan is one of the most densely populated areas of Kowloon, which is just north of Hong Kong Island in the New Territories. Working with the Urban Ecologies Design Lab, in anticipation of the process of demolition, we carefully removed and restructured the spaces, basically cleaning up, removing the subdivided apartments, reinstating utilities. Often all that required was a call to the companies to sort of ask them to put the power and the water back on. As I said, these buildings are high quality and, while neglected, have a lot of life left within them. So this newly reclaimed space in Jordan, within the old block, was the test site for the development of what we called the backpack housing system, so named because it could be transferred, or we hoped would be transferred, across a number of such sites. So unlike typical dormitory-style housing, each unit was designed for a specific client and for a specific space, and aimed to provide a high level of dignity to the occupant as they were to transition out of precarious housing to more permanent housing. The system blends customized components and standardized units, ensuring both flexibility and personalization. This customized modularity, again, draws on this LiDAR technology and site scanning technology, which allows for a high degree of precision, but more importantly, a high degree of speed in terms of being able to survey these idiosyncratic spaces. Designed to seamlessly adapt to the unique spatial configurations on each site, the system employs subtle adjustments, like angling the frames to tilt beneath existing columns or shifting the geometry in the plan to allow for light and air to circulate around each backpack. These fine-tuned modifications ensure the structure integrates as harmoniously as it can with the structure and its surroundings. At its most complete, each backpack provides a safe and well-appointed shelter and can be reconfigured as loose furniture, partitioning systems, or storage as required or as it moves on. It leverages digital fabrication workflows in combination with bespoke tools and templates that actually allow for simple hand assemblies. This backpack you see took 3 or 4 hours to put together with just myself and one research assistant in the planning. Each unit is a kit that combines standardized components and highly tailored adaptations, representing a kind of mass-produced bespoke. The connecting elements, the connective tissue of the structures, the folded metal plates, the basic structural units, the fastening systems remain a constant, while the panel systems are shaped to respond to the context. And the panel systems are just manufactured through a simple 2.5D CNC process, which we often use when we're making cabinetry or kitchens, and there's many of these places within Hong Kong which we tapped into. We had a really strong emphasis on quality, durability, natural materials. I should say that the typical emergency or transitioning housing is of extremely poor quality. It's foam, expanded metal, plastic, chipboard, and we wanted to sort of raise the level and what the expectation, I think, of for the occupants. It's made primarily in compressed bamboo and cork. So maybe to finish, backpack housing is not seen as a long-term model or an alternative to the proper provision of social housing, but rather as a means of alleviating some of the worst effects of the current crisis. In its adaptive capability, the system suggests an alternative vision for Hong Kong's built environment, which prioritizes reuse rather than reconstruction and people before speculation. The project that you see today was a pilot project which existed for 9 months and housed 10 individuals. The use of technology, allowing this precision and this tailoring, this adaptation to specific contexts, but also to the people that were using the sites, I think was significant. We also considered the design, energy efficiency, and the health and well-being of each occupant. And restricting the heating and cooling to this small enclosure allowed that space to be efficiently heated and cooled, and allowed the existing passive nature of Hong Kong's housing, which is traditionally designed to respond to its climate, to be reinstated. Backpack housing, I think, represents an alternative approach to urban redevelopment, seeing the urban landscape as a series of support systems. It involves stakeholders from various sectors, including technology, community, volunteers, and non-profit organizations, ensuring that there has been inclusion throughout the design process. The project's flexibility and adaptability allow for ongoing refinement, and actually throughout the course of the pilot project, we would visit residents and make changes to the backpacks based on their needs. A simple example of this, for example, we found that they didn't need a desk space to work. That idea of the way that we work, we kind of imposed on them, and in some ways that wasn't required. Most of the occupants did manual labor or worked in service or commercial sectors, so we just we removed that and put in some more storage. And I think I'd like to end there. That's the bell, right? I think that's all. Thank you, guys.
Fred, would you like to ask the first question? Yes, thank you, Nigel. Thank you for the presentation. Really interesting concept, especially with, I mean, we all know these buildings go into dispute and remain vacant for some time. I suppose my question with housing, the idea of the backpack temporary unit is an interesting one. You're using real materials, that gives a sense of dignity. But part of residential projects are also about creating a sense of community. So with this backpack unit, it looks like it's very much inward focused. And in the shots that you were showing with a multitude of those, you're almost creating, let's say, a mini urban environment. So has your design actually considered the space between and how the external surfaces may actually impact that level of engagement amongst residents?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think that idea of community was a key focus of the project, actually. And I should say, the partnerships in this project, so myself, Habitat for Humanity, and the Urban Ecologies Design Lab, had slightly different focuses. So, for example, Habitat was really involved in engaging with that and creating that community. And for example, on the second, so this unit occupies the second and third floor, and on the first floor there's a community centre. But what I should say is, I think we have to be careful to impose our ideas of living, I guess, on a completely different culture of living. So in early rounds of discussion, one of the important things that came out of this was this need and requirement for privacy. That became one of the reasons why these became enclosed. Traditionally, in dormitory housing, there is no doors. In fact, there's a closed door policy. They can't close the doors, and it can be really stifling, and many people actually prefer to live on the streets rather than to do that. The other options to living on the streets will be to sort of occupy what's called cage homes or subdivided units, which often are incredibly inhospitable. For example, with a cage home, also known as coffin beds, they're literally the size of a coffin, and by the time you put your belongings inside that space, there's nowhere for you to sleep. So that's kind of the options, and it's interesting to note they would prefer that over actually going to someone like Caritas, which is an organization in Hong Kong which provides dormitory style housing, because of that feeling of being overlooked or being supervised, being monitored.
Yeah, okay.
So what we did was separated those functions out. The spaces between are really programmed to allow sort of light air and ventilation. Sorry, am I shouting too much? It's too loud.
Yeah, well, congratulations on the project. I think it addresses a situation that's very current and very real to many communities. I was wondering and seeing the adaptive capability of the project that you mentioned. How did you see this being a model that can replicate not only for a housing problem, but maybe addressing other problems such as the climate crises that are happening around the world? And what do you think are the strongest features of the project that can really translate to address these other crises?
Yeah, that's really interesting. And can you guys hear me now better? Yeah, so not to be too architectural, capital A. So one of the sort of references, I guess, or inspiration to this project came from the work of Harbracken and this idea of support system, which was a model of housing, which were proposed at the same time as mass housing, which instead of seeing the city as a discrete set of housing blocks, which had a lifespan, saw instead the city as a series of services that you could plug in and into and out of. And that's really the way we think about the project, that we see that the city of Hong Kong is actually an urban geography that we can plug into. I think that has a lot of significance in terms of how you see the development of the city going forward. The idea that such projects would inhabit or re-inhabit spaces and transform it could change and were light and adaptable, whereas maybe the building cores and services will remain fixed and would allow us a bit more flexibility in how we program and use our spaces. I think I'm not sure if it can its ambition is to respond to the overall like problems that we have around the city and the housing, but I think it tries to alleviate some of a very specific and particular spatial problem and set of issues that are local to Hong Kong. But I think it does bring up other questions around again, adaptive reuse versus build and develop, demolish, build, develop, demolish, cyclical building cycles. And I think that's something which is really important, especially in today's climate and discussion on architecture and interiors.
Thank you.
I mean, I'm just one. I think this is a very interesting sort of study into the land scarcity in Hong Kong. But just wondering in terms of cost, how much does it cost to build each of this? Because although you say it takes like 3 hours on site, but I'm sure to prefab, you know, the rest of it takes much longer and a lot of cost. So what's that? What's your take on that?
Yeah, so the overall budget for the project that you see, so that was 6 housing occupancy of 12 people, was about 180,000 Hong Kong dollars, just about 20,000 USD. So this is a little bit more expensive than traditional sort of dormitory style renovation projects, but not significantly more expensive actually. And when you count, if you take that on a purely economic basis, we also overlook the environmental issues of using some of the materials that are being currently in use. So yes, of course, we can kick that can down the road a little bit. I think that a lot of the times emergency housing, disaster relief, all of these get sort of a pass in terms of their material quality, because the issues are so urgent. But the darker side of all of this is a sort of a landfill which is full of foam and compressed and expanded metal. So I think we have to act a little bit responsibly. Yes, it's more economically expensive to build units like this, but I think that, you know, there's a question of how should we as society invest in sort of those people who are most vulnerable, and this as a bare minimum really to sort of create some sort of a dignified environment for people who are in challenging circumstances. So economics, I think, has to be balanced with a wider look on how we sort of want to act responsibly as a society. But, you know.
Thank you. Well, I love the project, but I don't really understand it. And that's probably because I couldn't hear what you were saying before. But is this for one person, this unit?
Each unit. So each...
Just summarize. I mean, I presume that the loos are not in there, and you can't cook in it. It's not a tent. So what kind of life, how would an occupant move between this and the kind of everyday needs of cooking, eating, and shitting, and all of that?
That's a great question. So what we're, like, the backpack really provides is accommodation, sleeping, working, storage. So the existing housing block provides those services, the kitchens, the bathrooms, and any of the hard services already exist within these buildings and are of a reasonably high quality. So the bathrooms, kitchens are already there. So what we do is what we're doing essentially is taking away, sorry.
But it sort of goes back to Fred's question, really, is how people choose, or how you would like people to split their lives between this as a kind of bedroom space and how the rest of the house would work on a day-to-day basis is not very clear.
Is it possible to show one of the previous slides? So on the left-hand side, you can see a bathroom block, which was the existing. And either side of that bathroom block on the left-hand side are 2 breakout spaces, so one living and one cooking. And they are just the existing units, the position of the existing living rooms, the position of the existing kitchens and bathroom facilities, stripped back and in some cases intensified. And I should say any additions that we make in those areas are also portable, demountable, removable to the next site. So the units exist within that floor, and the spaces around are occupied or have various functions. As I said, living, kitchen, or space to work at the far left-hand side. But there was the reason why, in this case, that the units are enclosed, and each of these particular units have a dual occupancy, so they're shared between 2 occupants.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.